Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Julian Martinez. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Natural Capital. And today we'll be talking to you about the energy war and its implications. We have a couple of exciting topics on today's agenda, including what natural capital is, how it ties into the energy war, Web3, how it ties into the natural capital, and how it can affect the energy war. A little background about myself as the CTO and co-founder of Natural Capital. I'm mostly in charge of making the technical decisions for our platform. This can mean anything from maintaining the back end to the front end. Lately, I've been working on developing our smart contracts and researching ways to develop our APIs to connect with our outerlying IoT devices. Our main goal for our project is to verify, track, and trade carbon data in real time using IoT and LiDAR. So as you can assume, researching those things is very time consuming, but I enjoy it nonetheless. And we have a lot of exciting things on the roadmap for 2023 and beyond. A little background about me is I've worked at a couple of companies such as Avalanche in their initial deployment as an L1. As a member of their DApp squad, deployed various dApps such as the Jason Peterson NFT distribution, the Aave integration, as well as their Particle Banksy collaboration, and more recently have done some work in the decentralized identity space with a company called Blue Finance. I'm joined here today by my business partner, Christian Gustafsson, with whom I've served for a number of years with Alpha Company as a part of the Army Reserves. I'll go ahead and give the floor to him.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you for tuning in. Really exciting time, and it's been an absolute delight to get to where we are now. Julian and I originally started working on this about a year and a half ago when we were coming back from an airborne jump. He had a concussion. I was really tired, and he was looking at some ways to get creative using blockchain technology to basically help with projects that affect us environmentally, socially, related with energy. And on our ride back from the desert, we were discussing how the mechanisms to trade renewable energy and carbon credits are rather cumbersome, and they're not very well understood by the general public. And in a lot of cases too, they're also difficult to access, or they're expensive, or you have to go through a complicated process to start a registry and all these other things, which in conversations that we've been having with clients and partners and other folks, we've come to find that basically not a lot of people understand the energy or carbon markets. Not a lot of people understand blockchain and Web3. So when we're trying to combine all of it, we tend to get a lot of questions. And that was really the purpose of starting these webinars. This will be an ongoing series. We'd like to interview our clients, industry experts, and other folks that know, whether it's science, ag tech, energy policy, or any number of things that relate to this. Please let us know if you're interested in coming on in the future. And also, please feel free to update any questions that you may have, or upload any questions that you may have, and we'll get around to those. That being said, as Jules mentioned, we did serve in the same airborne unit together. I'm still in the military. I think the common thread here is that we're recognizing how energy security and energy sovereignty is a national security issue, and it should be a national security priority. We'll get into that more in this webinar and in the future. But that's a common thread that we've identified. And then also with my background being more environmental, having done my master's at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and done quite a bit of work in the conservation space, there's a lot of common threads of national security, environmental conservation, and energy security. So weaving these threads and looking at the true cost of doing business as it relates to what natural capital that we actually have, and how there's externalities in the market and issues that have ripple effects, such as what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now, that really, I think, gave the world a wake up call, and they felt the squeeze on energy, and like we're all feeling with food prices and other things going on. Most of this comes back to power, and we want to take the power back.
Well said. Well said, brother. And with that, I think that's a perfect cue to kick this thing off. We'll go ahead and get into the introduction here. As we recently stated, or we stated initially, the topics here are the energy war, introduction to natural capital, and exploring the impact on Web3 on energy. So let's get into it. Gustav had mentioned a very interesting topic right off the bat. As we are understanding more about energy and how it can be used as a means of, a military asset as well as a means of geopolitical influence, we're really understanding the consequences of either not having our own energy sovereignty, as well as experiencing the side effects of inflation and from this war that's happening with the conflict in Ukraine. And we're really seeing a shift from in paradigm from relying on natural resource or natural gases that have to be, extracted through means of maybe possibly degrading the environment over to a more sustainable development idea, as we're seeing with the uptick in interest of renewable energies, relying more on nuclear energies, and exploring new forms of energy production, whether it be by wind turbines, coastal wetland sources of energy, as well as obviously solar energy. And when in your opinion, how's the energy war affecting the balance and power among states? Like, how do you see this having influence over nations such as that?
Well, I think it really leaves us vulnerable, where we can't have that sovereignty. We all know that the grid is antiquated, that it's overworked. All it takes is a wildfire or some high winds or ice storm, and we've seen what happens in California and Texas and these other places, and one small glitch or enough people using the air conditioning, and all of a sudden, I think we all feel that squeeze, and it's quite evident that we're not. I think we're getting to a much better place than we've been, and it's amazing to see how quickly a lot of these automakers have basically turned the corner and started production on electric and everything. And not saying that that's the entire solution, but it's a part of it, and it all adds up. And the more that we can have the ability to be sovereign and secure, especially with our power, a lot of other things are going to fall into place behind that. And then relying, looking at renewable energy just holistically and objectively, I think is really important, because not all renewable power is good. There's a lot of these articles I've been seeing about how some major companies are buying up biomass, basically cutting down trees to make bio pellets to burn. And I don't think that's the right answer either. There's ways to do similar things using wastewater and other waste streams, where we don't necessarily have to cut down these virgin forests. But because of and you look at Europe as an example with what's going on, and we all know they get a lot of their energy from Russia. They're changing their policies, and some of them aren't good. They're going back on opening up, fracking in the UK or things along those lines. And other countries such as Germany, they've been very aggressive about where they stand on renewable energy and integrating into that market. I've got a lot of experience with renewable power, and it basically started with a biodiesel pickup I bought when I was in college, and experimenting with biodiesel and waste veggie oil and other things, and trying to be sovereign myself in that, and having done quite a bit of my master's research in coastal ecology in Louisiana, before, during, and after the BP disaster, opened my eyes to a lot of things too, and seeing that firsthand and being down there was extremely powerful, and it opened up a lot of other opportunities for me. But the real challenge here is finding solutions that just work for everybody, and how we can all be part of the solution.
Yeah, agreed. And I want to go back on that point you made about, Germany being intertwined in all of this. I really think beyond, not only the kind of stronghold on the natural gas industry that Russia has, it also this conflict kind of stokes relations between democratic and authoritarian alliances, right? So if we have a group of nations that is on a more democratic environment, and that's the way that they handle things, it is not inherently a good idea to partner with nations that have these resources just for the sake of, foreign policy and et cetera. And I think what that can do is ultimately drive, smaller nations who may not be super involved in these decisions on where natural resources go. They may just be utterly dependent on obtaining gas and energy from an authoritarian government such as, Russia. Whereas it may look bad to partner with democratic countries. So I think it also encourages kind of like this division between nations who may or may not be able to participate with a certain regime, whether that be democratic or authoritarian. I also want to get your opinion on the consequences of, extracting natural resources and kind of like the long-term effect that has on the environment. What are some things that you've seen in your experiences from, whether it be environmental degradation? I know you've done a lot of work in the coastal wetlands areas as well as um, mapped rivers and such in the Mississippi. What are some things you've seen that has really struck you as, hey, this is a long-term effect that I'm seeing, and there's a way to mitigate this?
It's a good question. It's obvious whenever you see a strip mine or an oil field or some of these other things. What's not always so obvious is more or less how water can be contaminated, such as through fracking. And I also am not completely opposed to fracking. I've studied it quite a bit, and it's if it's done the right way and in the right location where aquifers aren't being compromised, there's a lot of energy that can be brought out of there. And right now I'm out here in Colorado, and it's pretty evident to see all the fracking operations that go on. What's kind of interesting is that a lot of them actually have solar panels adjacent to them or on some of the systems, because it works. And Colorado gets 300 days of sun a year out in this particular area, and so that irony is kind of funny. But a lot of my concern is how our mining, energy extraction, and others, and this includes renewables, how that impacts wildlife, how that impacts land management, how that impacts our waterways. These are all things that need to be taken into account. And as these webinars continue, I'd like to be going into more specifics on those to give a better background and feel for that. I think we've got a lot of great resources to give a plethora of solutions all across the board. And another solution that I like quite a bit is using algae. I don't know the timeline of when it could be a potential fuel for the long term, but I've worked extensively with that too. Set the first land speed records on an algae fueled motorcycle. We entered it in Baja 1000, subsequently destroying the bike. But my goal for that wasn't even to finish necessarily. I wanted to be the first one to start there, and so that combination of racing to help promote renewable energy was a lot of fun, and that's something that we're looking at getting back into as time moves forward. But the one thing that I do like about algae as a biofuel is that you don't need fresh water, you don't need farmland, and it sucks up CO2 and can use excess nutrients such as from a wastewater facility. So there's some really great next generation technologies that can come in and take us to a whole other level and do things that we haven't even considered. But we need to start looking at all the solutions.
No, agreed. And to your point on, investigating algae as another source of energy and just carbon removal in general, I've read through some studies that support it as one of the main actors in removing carbon in ways that we haven't really understood yet. And also, I think it's one of those things that is kind of affected by, things like oil spills. I was reading an article on Bloomberg that has reported that there's been over $8.5 billion in damage in the last 30 years from oil spills. And we're losing a lot of the Earth's uh, biodiversity from accidents that happen through oil production. Now, I know domestic oil production is a great thing, but ultimately, I think it'd be great to find a hybrid solution where we mitigate the damaging effects of, you know, um, obtaining these natural gases and et cetera, and avoid the environmental degradation. I think the impact of the energy war is brilliantly obvious when it comes to things like this. So let's talk about a little bit on the things that the energy war does affect. We talked about biodiversity, natural landscapes being affected, and now why is that important? How is the soil, the water, the air, and how are these all tied into the energy war, and how do non-renewable sources such as fossil fuels kind of affect this industry?
Well, everything's connected, and that's been um, there's a great reference that the United Nations has, or United Nations have. It's called the air, water, energy, climate nexus, and might not be that exact order, but uh, it's really hard to just look at it as one issue, because in a lot of cases it takes a considerable amount of fresh water to make energy, or it takes a lot of energy to produce our food, or any kind of other combination where it's not just an isolated topic. There's this deep interconnectedness, and a big part of that comes down to how things are priced and how things are subsidized. Right now, uh, people would think that fuel is expensive in the United States, but then you go over to Europe or some of these other countries where the fossil fuel industry isn't subsidized, and it is more expensive. And not a lot of people realize that the fossil fuel industry is heavily subsidized, and in a big part by our military too. That security component is absolutely huge. So being able to look at this holistically is something that we are encouraging everyone to do, and basically doing that right now through this conversation, and opening up some additional resources, and uh, that we have and we know about, and sharing it to spread that knowledge, and hopefully drive some change forward.
Well said, brother. Well said. Before we got on the call, we had mentioned something about taking care of the environment, taking care of the climate as if it was a body. Now, the point that we made was, while you don't always see these natural capital resources in action, it's very apparent when there's a problem, when the time comes for a natural disaster that could have been mitigated through better maintenance of a coastal area. We're seeing more natural disasters than we ever have in history, with fires happening in Australia, um, deforestation happening at an alarming rate in Brazil, causing the levels of carbon, atmospheric CO2 to rise. And what is your take on preserving and investing in natural capital for not only sustainable development, but for valuing these natural capital services?
Well, I think that conservation is ultimately a security issue, because and I've had this conversation with a number of people when I'm training at different bases, and I see someone leaving trash out, or not taking care of the vehicle properly if it's leaking oil or other things, and a lot of times there'll be pushback, and I'll say to guys, like, what's the point of fighting for this country if we're trashing it? So that ecosystem, the ecosystem services, and a better valuation of those is extremely important. The identifying what externalities are in the marketplace, I think, is also a critical thing that is oftentimes left out of the conversation, because if a company's polluting, a lot of times the impacts felt by pollution are felt by those with the least means to do anything about it, and that becomes a social justice issue in a lot of cases, because that pollution is still part of the market. It's still something that has a cost, or has a price to pay due
Mhm.
to increases in asthma or lung cancer or things of that nature. So making the market more holistic and approaching that this as an integrated theme is something that is really at the core of natural capital, because what we want to do is enable people to earn more money using carbon and energy credits, being able to have community choice as far as their power goes. It should be like being able to pick out which apples you want at the store. Do you want the organic pink ladies, or do you want the old school red delicious that weird filmy wax on it and you don't know where it came from? Want our power to basically be the same thing. If your neighbor has solar panels on their roof and they've got excess power, why does that have to go back to the grid? Why can't maybe I buy that from my neighbor and help subsidize them? Uh, so these aren't necessarily abstract concepts. They're beginning to take shape, and there's a lot of great work being done in the instances of the community choice power and things of that nature. There's some good stories out of San Diego as far as that goes. The other thing I really like seeing are how a lot of these bases are starting to integrate solar and wind and other things, and also energy efficient solutions too. That comes in big time, and I'd eventually like to see every base that we have off the grid. I think the fact that they're not is a big concern, and there's a really great uh, uh, success story for renewable energy at the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, also in San Diego. So where they're basically able to come completely off the grid, and there's still challenges in producing the liquid fuel that the base would need, but that's something that can also be solved, I think, eventually. So I really like focusing on the solutions instead of pointing fingers at the problems, and I think there's a great deal of solutions coming out that we'll continue to discuss and touch on as time rolls on.
Yeah, well said, brother. Well said. Definitely. I like the point you made about how every base should be, separated from the grid. I really think it makes a good use case for how, nature-based solutions could be used for not only climate change mitigation, but, adapting something that comes from the ecosystem, making it a service, and actually providing opportunities for economic growth and human well-being. As far as the bases being off grid too, it does encourage not only energy sovereignty, but it encourages the military stance on taking, I guess, a defensive position when it comes to all things considered. As we know, the landscape of war is ever evolving, and that includes hackers and people who are extremely well versed in computer science. And as we've seen before, United States is not always exempt from attacks from cybersecurity aspects and et cetera. And I think furthering ourselves from the central point of failure, such as a power grid, et cetera, relying on these more decentralized, more outwardly, externally distributed um, centers for energy that could be maintained by a community, it would be really, really powerful for something for hardening the defenses of the United States military, especially when it comes to cyber attacks. Now, let's go ahead and talk about our next subject, the benefits of Web3, or introducing Web3 and its potential impact on the energy industry. As we were saying before, with the example of the decentralized grid and buying power from your neighbors, I think and fully believe that this can be sustained through blockchain technology. Right now at Natural Capital, previously stated that we're integrating Internet of Things with Web3 and tying everything together via smart contracts and API. I do believe that we are very close, not only as a project, but in the time that we are in Web3 and energy to make this a reality. We're already seeing certain communities in San Diego standing up their own community grids where we have generators and sources of power to power strictly community areas. I don't think that we're in a position to say that it would be entirely impossible for Web3 to not only help ease the process of this, but it could automate these processes. We can even create a circular economy for power producers, local power producers who are producing power via solar energy to become part of the renewable energy credit market, and also encourage, just circular economies in general, because if it starts with solar, then it can become carbon. We can also move into sustaining water quality, et cetera. But I think Web3 really lays the groundwork for a trustless way for people to interact with each other and stand up these sovereign energy centers that serve these communities. Yeah, so I want to talk about the benefits of Web3 and how it can, you know, really how we could stand up a peer-to-peer energy trading system. Going back to the topic of buying energy from your community member here, if you were to produce X amount of megawatts, let's just say 1 megawatt, you would be allowed a carbon, or you would be allowed what's called a renewable energy credit. Now, if your community member were to use that megawatt, that could be automated through smart contracts, APIs, a number of other devices. That person who sold you that energy would not only be able to get paid by you for the megawatt, but they would also be able to participate in the renewable energy credit market. I think this opens up a huge supply of supplementary income for local power producers, as well as eases the responsibility on big energy producers to produce energy from sustainable means. Uh, Gustav, in your experience, what have you seen as far as these community grids, and can you speak a little bit more on peer-to-peer energy exchange?
Absolutely. Well, and I think the real key point to understand is that we don't really have the choice with power like we do with other products. Like I was given the exact example about the apples. That's beginning to change, and our role is to act as a catalyst to drive that forward by supporting those transactions and exchanges, and also reinvesting into renewable energy and sustainability projects. So really facilitating that peer-to-peer community and facilitating the choice in what energy source that you have is absolutely critical to moving this forward. And there's a lot of resistance, so to speak. That was an electrical pun. Uh, um, and that's understandable by some of these power companies, but some are being proactive and doing the right thing. And I think whatever we can do to facilitate energy sovereignty, to facilitate ways to make these peer-to-peer transactions and to take some pressure off the grid, those are really our core focuses. And when you get down to it, and the understanding blockchain and Web3 isn't really that complicated if you break it down. And I kind of think of blockchain as a database or a public ledger where these transactions can be documented, facilitated, and recorded, and done in a way to where there's more transparency. And that's also what ties into the carbon market too. There's really not a lot of transparency with carbon trading, and these registries have made it difficult and expensive to kind of get in the game sometimes. And then you hear about organizations like the Nature Conservancy that are trustworthy, and I've had plenty of research interactions and friends that work there, but they got in some hot water with their carbon sequestration program because they were essentially double dipping on land management and conservation projects that they already had. And then people could buy the offsets, and they were saying it was going to this. But we would like to be able to take it to as far as uh, if you want to do a carbon offset, you'll know exactly where that's going. That'll be documented via the public ledger. And we've been working on a way to integrate some technology that actually shows the real-time sequestration potential of forests, of mangrove swamps, of blue carbon, kelp carbon removal, and a number of other things. So we're taking the sequestration to the next level, and we'll be providing some real-time transparency and solutions very soon.
Yeah. And on that note, we're definitely facing some barriers to entry there. I mean, as Gustav had previously mentioned, there's a lot of resistance in the entrance to the renewable energy certificate market as well as the carbon markets. With the existing methodologies out there in the market, not everyone has access to go and certify a piece of land that they have. Not everyone has the 30 grand or whatever absorbent amount of money they would need to run these assessments. And not everyone understands that they can participate in the carbon market and renewable energy market, whether they're a big player, small player. We actually aim to make it accessible for a large share of anybody who has solar panels, people who are holding land and not really using, that have carbon sequestration abilities. Our project really aims to improve the market participation, lower the barriers to access, and overall really increase the value of these assets that serve us on an ecosystem level. Carbon has been very undervalued for a while now. It's been trading at about $1.83. If you're going to say that removing a ton of carbon, 1 metric ton of carbon from the atmosphere is only worth $1.83, I think we need to look at how we're valuing things in our financial system as a whole. That price should be way higher for the amount of service that these natural resources provide us. I mean, they essentially sustain all human life on Earth. So raising the value of these things that perpetuate the carbon market and perpetuate projects to remove carbon from the atmosphere is a conversation that definitely needs to be had. I think the path forward for this is to keep deploying pilot projects from large organizations that either are responsible for a large amount of pollution and emitting carbon into the atmosphere, or just generally public consultations by larger bodies who are responsible for legislation on these things, such as BERA, Gold Standard, Climate Action Reserve, et cetera. But I think ultimately it's going to take a solution where we all work together. We all agree, hey, the old system's broken. There needs to be a new system. We need to improve accessibility, lower these barriers to entry, and we need to figure out a way to get this value of these assets to where they need to be. So with that being said, I'd like to move on to the conclusion here. I think we learned a lot about the energy war today. We're understanding how it affects various geopolitical positions around the globe, how it stokes tensions not only domestically, but foreign, between what we're seeing in the Russia-Ukraine. We're seeing what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine, and how America is trying to move away from foreign natural resources and trying to rely more on domestic assets. Gustav, what are your thoughts on the future of the energy war, Web3, and how it pertains to natural capital?
Well, I'm very excited about what we're offering and what we've been doing, and we'll continue to drive this forward. This has obviously been just a high level overview of these issues and these topics. And for future webinars, we're going to be digging into more specifics. Please let us know if there's any topics or key areas that you're interested in learning more about, and we can cover down on those. This integration of new tech, biofuels, security, all these things is very exciting, and it really touches almost every aspect of our society and just global economies, and we can't go anywhere without power one way or another. And this is something that we really need to think about driving forward, going forward, because uh, we're extremely vulnerable, and it's not a good position to be in. It's not a good feeling to be in, and if we can use these larger global conflicts as reasons to say, well, what if power wasn't the issue? Would this conflict still be going on, or
Mhm.
who's being affected by these inequalities and inconsistencies in the market, and how can we change that? And really, once again, these topics are really difficult to pull apart and just uh, say they're not interdependent, because they certainly are. And um, and what we're doing is providing a way, like Julian was saying, for everyone to be more involved in this, and have more of a stake at the table, and be able to choose what type of power that they want, and support that economy, and build that out almost in a way that's being privately subsidized. And so I'm once again just very excited about where we're at. Going to keep the pedal down and keep pushing forward, and appreciate it, everybody, for tuning in. And if we had any questions, we can go over those. But um, hope to see you next time.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. And with that, I'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions that we may have.
Hey guys, thank you so much for your insights, especially regarding Web3. Can you further elaborate on how Web3 relates to energy access?
Yeah, I think, with Web3 and energy access, it really has the potential to, create these new systems. And I like to think in terms, and particularly like developing communities and developing countries. I mean, for example, like a blockchain peer-to-peer energy trading system could allow for not only the decentralization of energy production amongst folks who are already using solar panels or finding means of producing energy in another way, but also distribution, right? It makes it possible for these individuals to not only generate their own energy, but with a decentralized trading system, we could have them track and trade their own energy. I think it could increase, access to the energy while also encouraging the circular economy that we're talking about. But yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. And yeah, another question. How can we balance economic development with the protection of natural capital?
You want to take this one, Lisa?
Sure. So I think balancing uh, development with natural capital is done by better valuing those ecosystem services, and that's what that's what's difficult to do, because we're used to having cheap paper, we're used to having all these different things at our fingertips, and if we look at the paper example, most timber and lumber companies, um, they're working off of U.S. Forest Service or state-run lease lands. Uh, those companies, and nothing against them, but they're not coming in and planting an entire forest, a virgin forest, for instance, and then waiting the number of decades or longer, to get that. They're coming in and they're paying a lease. They're taking out a primary product, and they're putting it into production. So the valuation of a lot of things that we get on a daily basis, or things that we use on a daily basis, is completely skewed. And I'm not saying that we need to drive up the price of paper or something, but we need to look at what that true cost is for production, and what it would take to either replicate that separately, or what's being done to give some offsets. We can't just keep taking and expecting everything to be okay. That's not how it works. That's not how anything really works. And in a way, finding these solutions to increase, as I was saying, basically self-subsidizing this industry through the credit trading markets is a way that we can move this forward, and give people more of a choice. in what they do. Because I think a lot of people really do want to do the right thing at the end of the day, and we don't want to be on a trash planet. But at the same time, we need to eat, we need power, we need heat, we need to get around. So it's tough to balance that, but it is possible, and I think it really starts with taking into account how much the true cost of production really is.
Well said. Well said.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Hey guys, I might add one thing. Tim here. You guys spoke to a lot of cool things, energy and food production, things like that. Maybe touch on for the group barriers of entry. I know coming from ag tech, there's a big push, and a lot of the major players in the ag tech world are pushing digital platforms for transparency in the food supply. So kind of embracing, not quite yet, but I think you guys would be on the cutting edge of this is incorporating the blockchain in the transparency of the food supply. What do you foresee, barriers of entry to that, and how that could be rolled out through NCC?
That was a great question, Tim. Appreciate the chiming in. I think, yeah, that's a big one to pick apart. But I think if there may be some regulatory hurdles to that, or maybe the companies don't want to put that information out there because that would affect their pricing, especially with some of these commodity crops. And I know you've got a lot of experience there, and feel free to touch on that too. And as we were discussing, before this, we really want to get into the agricultural component of this, because it's such a huge aspect of our society, and I think people are concerned about pricing, obviously, supply chain issues that we've all been seeing and experiencing, and to be able to have more transparency in that, and information that's publicly available can potentially help mitigate issues seen with supply chain snags, and maybe people can become more collaborative, because we know that there's just so much waste that goes on with food, whether something's spoiling, or it's sitting in a Connex box for too long, or it's been at the grocery store and then all of a sudden being thrown out when it still looks usable. I think if we can get more diligent about understanding that supply chain, and having some components there, because as I mentioned earlier, producing food requires a lot of energy, it requires a lot of water, and it really comes back to finding ways that I think we can share resources better, share information better, and there may be some interesting ties too with the community power that we talked about, because some of these co-ops that I've seen for food are really impressive and incredible, and they save a lot of money, and they produce food and give some redundancy to that. And you can even look back at I love looking back at those posters from World War II, and they all involved doing your part, recycling, planting your own garden, not wasting natural resources. I mean, these are literally things that drove the war effort. And I've seen this stuff like hemp for the war, or it's awesome, and we really gotten away from that by, I think, having some of these systems that are too big to fail, and then they end up leaving everybody in the dark, so to speak, or paying twice as much for eggs, or what have you. So I think the solutions are there, just the same for food like they are with energy.
Sure.
Yeah,
no, very well said, Christian. I knew you had the answer to that. I wanted to poke at you just a minute there, because I think one thing that stands out to me, obviously coming from agriculture, is you even mentioned this earlier with subsidies and things like that. We're really kind of perpetuating this kind of broken cycle where we're throwing subsidy money at production agriculture, and there's not a lot of accountability there. And if we can incorporate or incentivize even some of those best practices and create kind of a new cycle there, I think that really offsets some of those, subsidies and practices that kind of just keep feeding the current beast. And I think that's really probably one of the coolest things, just given my background about what you guys are doing for sure. So just wanted to get that out for the group.
Appreciate that, Tim, and really looking forward to working with you on this going forward.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for the group? All right. Well, with that, we at Natural Capital would like to thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for your time. We'll have plenty more of these. And as Gustafson said, if you have any ideas on or topics you want to discuss, or if you're a professional in the space, please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or via our website, ncrypto.earth. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand the floor over to Gustafson to close it out, and we'll be on our way.
Well, thanks again for everyone's time. That's one of our other precious resources, and and don't want to hold up anyone anymore. But yeah, please reach out, follow us, stay tuned to our updates, and we'll likely be rolling one of these out probably about every other week. So stay tuned, and thanks again for stopping in.
All right, y'all. Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.